Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Ballad of Sword and Wine Volume 4, also known as Tang Jiu by Tang Jiu Qing, and as promised, just giving you all a couple more chapters since yesterday was a little bit short. I say yesterday, but really it's still Friday for me. So, same day, but y'all are getting it the next day. Whatever. Let's go ahead and start. I'm thinking I can possibly give you guys 3 more chapters. We'll just see where the wind blows. Enjoy. Chapter 132. Troops on the Move. When Wu Ziyu returned from the battlefield to border camp, he had passed 3rd Sand Camp and visited base camp. However, in the eyes of the generals from these camps, he had never been considered a commanding general. In discussions of military affairs, his name came up only in relation to grain delivery. When the Hanma tribe had launched a sudden assault on Li Bei's trade market in the 8th year of Xiandu, the quickest troops to respond were the supply squadrons led by Wu Ziyu. It was the only battle he had ever fought. Now that Border Camp's main forces have been dispatched to the front line up north, you are the commanding general of Border Camp. The Imperial Army will send scouts up to the 3rd Sand Camp for reconnaissance. When they return, I hope to have the assistance of Border Camp. Xiao Chuye set down his bowl and continued. The surprise attack from the Liaoying tribe was obviously planned for some time. Cut off access to 3rd Sand Camp's bridleway and Border Camp will lose its eyes and ears, along with its protective barrier. If you retreat now, it's true that you can ensure the safety of the supplies, but the battlefield, with 1st Sand Camp marking its edge, will end up surrounded by the Biansha horsemen on all sides. No matter how many men are in the Liuyang camps, they'll have to split their forces. A team will have to bypass the Li Bei homeland in a long-distance march and head for the battlefield in the northeast to provide reinforcement. By then, it won't matter if there are supplies to spare. The frontline troops will have long been wiped out. Xiao Jiming had chosen Border Camp as a supply site because the roads that connected it with 3rd Sand Camp to the east and the Northeast Provisions Trail to the west. It could swiftly deliver supplies and deploy troops for rapid reinforcement. Once this place was gone, Xiao Fangshu, still on the front lines, would be cut off from both. There was no direct road from the Northeast Provisions Trail to 1st Sand Camp. Zhao Hui would have to take a detour, which would add 4 days to the journey at minimum. In these 4 days, Xiao Fangshu, with neither supplies nor reinforcements, would be left to face the Hanma tribe to the east and the Liaoying tribe to the south. The Biansha horsemen needed only send their soldiers to fight them in turns. They would quickly wear down Xiao Fangshu's elite forces, already exhausted from protracted battle. Wu Ziyu's fury had been extinguished. He stood in silence for a moment before saying, "The Liuyang camps under Zhao Hui's command are one of the Li Bei armored cavalry's most elite forces. The Liaoying tribe that surprised us here won't stop him. He can forego the roundabout route and cut straight through here to the battlefield." As one of Li Bei's most elite forces, the troops in the Liuyang camp are the ones who have exchanged the most blows with the Hanma tribe. Amur likely understands their capabilities as well as we do. If you know Zhao Hui can break through the Liaoying tribe's encirclement and rush to the battlefield from here, Amur must have considered the same thing. Today was a prime opportunity for him to wipe out this whole camp with a surprise attack, yet he sent only the Liaoying tribe. Can you guess what he's thinking? Wu Ziyu's expression gradually turned dark. Of the famous 36 stratagems of war, there was one called releasing one's adversaries in order to ensnare them. Wu Ziyu's squadron encountered a surprise attack today at Border Camp. Faced with this crisis, it was reasonable to assume he would send his guards rushing to the Northeast Provisions Trail with the most crucial supplies. By the time Zhao Hui received these supplies, it would be too late for the camp. Sending reinforcements to the front line via a roundabout route was both time-consuming and dangerous, so Zhao Hui would be forced to turn his attention to the occupied border camp and plan his attack based on the number of Liaoying tribe soldiers reported by Wu Ziyu's guards. Once he arrived at border camp, however, Amur would likely have withdrawn the Liaoying tribe and be lying in wait with Biansha's elite cavalry. Instead of the weaker forces he expected, Zhao Hui would be up against a total assault from Amur. Whether he won or lost, Zhao Hui would be held up at border camp, leaving Xiao Fangxu stranded on the front line. Amur, it seemed, understood the Li Bei armored cavalry all too well. So Zhao Hui can't come. But we can't win either, Wu Ziyu said. The army is rapidly depleting their provisions on the front line. Either way, his lordship will face an arduous battle in a few days' time. He walked over to a shelf, pulled down a map, and shook it out onto the ground. 3rd Sand Camp is right next to 2nd Sand Camp. If Amur launches a surprise assault northward from there, he'll be striking at his lordship's back. Tantaihu, having just finished washing up, walked in barefoot, his robe hanging loosely off his shoulders. When he saw everyone gathered around the map, he squatted down to join them. What should we do? Wu Ziyu lifted his eyes and looked at Xiao Chiye. We lose if we advance, and we lose if we retreat. Amur has anticipated any move we might make. Tantaihu touched the scar on his face. That's not true. He doesn't know about the Imperial Army. He couldn't have anticipated our troops' arrival. He pointed to 3rd Sand Camp on the map. This place is close to Mount Luo and Zhongbo, where bandits abound. The Liaoying tribe evaded the Li Bei Armored Cavalry's Falcon Patrol and brought heavy equipment like catapults south of border camp for a sneak attack. To achieve this, they must have had the help of the bandits. I don't know much about these schemes and strategies, but there's something the Vice Gongzi said that makes sense. Xiao Chiye's eyebrows shot up. What did Lanzhou say? Smart people don't do unnecessary things. Tantaihu's expression turned grave. Why would Amur go to all this trouble to catch Zhao Hui here? If his battle against his lordship the prince have been going smoothly, why split his forces like this? Xiao Chiye bent over and looked at the map, twirling his thumb ring. That's right. A plan like this shows that Amur is also having a hard time on the battlefield. It's already the 7th month. If the war goes through autumn without a decisive victory for either side, Amur will face the bitter cold of winter. All of Biansha's grain reserves this year were directed to the battlefield. The longer the war drags on, the more unfavorable their position. Wu Ziyu blinked, remembering something, but Xiao Chiye continued. After my brother was injured, Amur changed the strategy he'd been using for the past few years. When I was in Suzhou, I heard the Biansha horsemen had fought their way to Tudalung Banner. In the past, their cavalry would strike and run, yet now this was no longer the case. Not only did they not run, they held what ground they remained and advanced in full force. Amur has lost his patience in the desert. He's encroaching farther and farther into Li Bei, trying to occupy our grasslands and our camps. From this standpoint alone, border camp is vital. If we lose this place, Li Bei will have to take a great step back. 3rd Sand Camp will fall completely, and the rest of our defenses in the east will follow. If we can hold onto border camp, we can give my father some breathing room. And as long as he's on the battlefield, Amur won't be able to push past this line. Xiao Chiye pointed out border camp's location to Wu Ziyu. If you can hold on until the first snow of the year, you'll have dealt a heavy blow to Amur. No matter what, we cannot lose border camp. Draw a north-south boundary line extending from here. We can only move forward. We can never retreat. Wu Ziyu looked down at the map. But if Amur plans to lock down Zhao Hui's Liuyang camps from here, how can we stop him with the 25,000 men we have at present? He wondered. 3rd Sand Camp is a key strategic point. If Amur has the Hanma tribe stationed there, our chance of launching a counterattack will go from slim to none. Xiao Chiye drew his hand back from the map and thought a moment. The Biansha horsemen are used to the passive rhythm of the Li Bei armored cavalry. Amur feels confident placing such a bet because he's sure the troops in border camp won't dare head east and launch an assault of their own. The men they sent to attack border camp were caught off guard by our response. 3rd Sand Camp is some distance away. After fleeing here, our enemies won't reach it until tomorrow morning. If we set off before dawn, we'll arrive at 3rd Sand Camp just as they're resting from their march. Still squatting, Wu Ziyu shifted his weight and stared silently at the map for a long time. By the time he reached a resolution, his legs had gone numb. If you've made up your mind to go, Supreme Commander, The Imperial Army can use the remaining battle steeds in border camp. The Imperial Army is an infantry force. There's no need for battle steeds. Besides, the steeds of Li Bei are too heavy, and they make a commotion when they gallop. They aren't suitable for laying an ambush. Xiao Chuye swept his gaze over Tan Taihu, Chen Yang, and Gu Jin. Finally, he said to Wu Ziyu, "Let the Imperial Army greet Amur this time." The Imperial Army set out before dawn the next day. Despite his injury, Gu Jin had resumed his position as scout. Tan Taihu followed Xiao Chuye, leaving Chen Yang behind to hold border camp. Wu Ziyu was puzzled, but when he saw Chen Yang had no complaints, he didn't probe further. At this hour, the morning dew was still heavy on the grasses. The Imperial Army hadn't been walking long before their armor was soaked. They didn't follow the bridleway, but took the same route the Liaoying tribe had taken when they retreated. "This place isn't far from Zhongbo's borders. Master, why is there no relay station set up here?" Tan Taihu looked southward. "Once you cross this grassland, Mount Luo is only a day and a night's ride away." The defenses of the Li Bei armored cavalry were all set up with the Biansha horsemen in mind. Xiao Chuye glanced south, his blade at his side. The bandits didn't dare come this far north before. Times are different now. Anyone who throws their lot in with the Biansha Baldies are fucking bastards. Tan Taihu spat hatefully as he plucked at the grass. The Imperial Army traveled at a rapid march, but it was afternoon when they arrived within sight of 3rd Sand Camp. It was a permanent encampment with watchtowers and protective walls. Gu Jin lay prone in the grass and remained still for a long time. Tan Taihu followed suit and waited a moment, but he could see nothing of interest up ahead. "What do you see?" Stretching out a hand, Gu Jin brushed the grass aside. "Wu Ziyu was right. There's cavalry from the Hanma tribe in 3rd Sand Camp. The horse dung is fresh. They set up patrols around the camp with far more vigilance than what we had in border camp." He rolled over and squinted up at the sky. No whistles and no sacred falcons. The Liaoying tribe that surprised border camp yesterday was a feint. "This place is hard to attack," Tan Taihu said. "The camp is surrounded by grassy fields. If we get any closer, we'll have nowhere to hide. Remember, this is 3rd Sand Camp." Gu Jin felt around for the tobacco in his robe and stuffed it directly into his mouth to chew. "There are watchtowers on all 4 corners. Not only will we have nowhere to hide, there are also caltrops laid out on the outskirts of the camp, and spiked road barriers set up at the front and back to hinder cavalry." Tan Taihu looked back and said quietly to Xiao Chuye, "How are we going through the ditches? They still have to eat, drink, piss, and shit." Xiao Chuye didn't answer, but Gu Jin looked a little awkward. He lowered his head down into the grass, saying in an even softer voice, "There used to be ditches that led out of the camp. You've heard how Master once used this move to infiltrate the Biansha camp during the battle in the eastern mountain range. Well, our heir felt this was a hole in our defenses and sealed off the camp's ditches when he returned." Tan Taihu shut his mouth and lay flat to the earth. The selection and layout of a campsite were of utmost importance for any troops during a war, and the latrine was the most important element of all. Filthy ditches like this had to be dug far from the army provisions and the tents where the soldiers slept. They had to either be very deep or drain away out of the camp. 3rd Sand Camp was a permanent fort. A ditch that led out was naturally the preferable option. But Xiao Chuye had previously dug his way into a Biansha encampment with only a handful of soldiers and set fire to the camp from within. This had left a deep impression on Xiao Jiming. To be safe, the heir ordered all the latrines in Li Bei's camps reconstructed as deep ditches with waste disposed of on a fixed schedule. No one could have known this change would become an obstacle for Xiao Chuye years later. How were they to attack now? Xiao Chuye alone was looking at the sky. "Don't worry. I have a plan." Chapter 133. 9 Years. Evening fell, and the sun made its descent in the west. Hu Helu, the Biansha general who had launched the surprise attack on 3rd Sand Camp, was having his meal. Born in the Tang Jiu tribe, he was in the prime of his life at almost 40 years old. After Amur took command of the 4 tribes, Hu Helu became not only Amur's adopted son, but also a capable general under his command. By a curious coincidence, he was also the one who had led the squadron Xiao Chuye infiltrated 9 years ago in the eastern mountain range. Though a narrow-minded man with a hot temper, Hu Helu was also resourceful and knew when to advance and retreat. Guo Weili had lost battles to him more than once, and the 2 men were known to hurl insults and spit at one another on the battlefield. Amur had sent Hu Helu to the southeast because his people already held a Tudalung banner, but also because Hu Helu had an exceptional talent for fighting battles in the wilderness. He'd once kept Guo Weili surrounded in a swamp for a day and night, picking off Guo Weili's forces and sending the morale of base camp plunging. The Esahuri wants me to treat the captured Libe military craftsmen well, but these people are more stubborn than mules. Feeding them is a waste of food. Hu Helu stripped mutton flesh off the bone with the dagger in his hand and spoke to his deputy general in the Biansha tongue. I'm thinking of just shipping all the equipment and food out of here and slaughtering the craftsmen. The Tang Jiu tribe still has some troops in the east that can watch over the supplies for the Esahuri for now. Before you left, the Esahuri specifically instructed you not to hurt the craftsmen. Beiyim, the deputy general, was an older man with a dark complexion. Under Hu Helu's command, he had never had the chance to be promoted despite his age. He faced Hu Helu and tried to persuade him. The Esahuri holds these craftsmen in high regard. Why incur his wrath over this? Hu Helu tossed the dagger onto the tray and grabbed a handkerchief to wipe his hands. He rose and looked out from the pinned-up tent flap. But they've enraged me. Hu Helu bent slightly and peered at the military craftsmen bound in the clearing outside. You understand the language of the Zhou Empire, too. They called me a butcher of the eastern mountain range. They said they want to fuck my mother. They've been out in the sun for 4 days without food or water, Beiyim said. Even the sacred falcons of the Liaoying tribe must eat meat after so long if they wish to survive. In their strategies of war, it's said that if you want your opponents to submit, you should make them feel not only fear but gratitude as well. You've made them afraid. Give them food and water, then untie them and show them concern with a smile. They will be grateful to you and grateful to the Esahuri. Hu Helu stroked his stubbled jaw and did as his deputy advised. Far from being grateful, his prisoners knocked over the water he sent them, and their curses continued uninterrupted well into the night. Unable to sleep soundly, Hu Helu abandoned the Zhou Empire's way and used his own method. He had the mouthy military craftsmen hung up on the pole rack before the clearing and ordered his men to skin them like sheep. Standing in the open space, Hu Helu gestured at his belly and said in the language of the Zhou Empire, Xiao Fengshu's going hungry on the battlefield. How can he fight a war on an empty stomach? Since you're all so fat, I'll have your flesh air-dried and sent to him. That way, everyone will win. Hu Helu had the rest of them whipped as punishment. Military craftsmen, who couldn't even fight, were worthless in his eyes. Retaining them was nothing but a burden. Better to kill them as soon as possible and be done with it. He had already hung the head of the commanding general of the 3rd Sand Camp on the watchtower and slaughtered the captured battle steeds. If not for his fear of Amur, he wouldn't have remained here in 3rd Sand Camp to await orders. He had conquered this place. All he wanted was to charge forward and be first among the 12 tribes of Biansha to breach the northeast provisions trail. Long after midnight, silence reigned in the sleeping camp. The Liaoying tribe's failed sneak attack on border camp the day before had sent Hu Helu into a rage. As punishment, the attack squadron from the Liaoying tribe was deprived of food and punished with night watch duty so they couldn't sleep. The soldier on the watchtower rubbed at his eyes. In the faint light of the torches, he saw the grass in the distance stir in the wind. The walls of 3rd Sand Camp were high and sturdy. From his vantage on the watchtower, he couldn't see the foot of the thick walls. As he yawned, he heard a rustling noise. It sounded like the rustle of the grass in the wind, but the noise soon repeated, swelling into what sounded like tidal waves rushing through the fields. The soldier's ears twitched. He leaned over the side of the watchtower to look beyond the camp, but it was too dark to make anything out. Without warning, a row of hands reached out over the battlement, followed by a row of men swinging up in unison. Both parties looked at each other, equally stunned. The soldier from the Liaoying tribe reacted swiftly. Even while trading widespread stares with the strangers, he let out a long whistle. The sound resonated through 3rd Sand Camp. Hu Helu, who had only just fallen asleep, bolted awake and pulled on his boots. He lifted the tent flap and was about to rush to his horse when Ba Yim stopped him. Hu Helu, we don't know anything about the enemy forces. We might be falling for a trap if we pursue them so rashly. As Hu Helu hesitated, a rain of arrows whistled down from the top of the fortress walls. Enraged, he shoved Ba Yim aside and mounted his horse. Those border camp fools are all useless. There's no elite company from the Libe armored cavalry there. They're trying to launch a sneak attack under the cover of darkness to rattle me. Get on your horse. The battle steeds of Libe can't outrun us. We haven't received the Esahuri's orders yet. Ba Yim tugged at Hu Helu's reins and rushed to say, This is bizarre. Border camp should be short manpower. If they dare to attack, they must have come prepared. Hu Helu, it's a trap. We should remain here. As long as we don't open the gate, they can't breach the walls. Hu Helu spurred his horse on, dragging Ba Yim a few staggering steps. He whipped his riding crop around to point at Ba Yim. Studying their books has turned you foolish. To hell with sitting on the camp like a hen on eggs. We are eagles that pursue our enemies across the prairies. If we remain here, we'll be defeated. There were fewer than 500 attackers scaling the walls, but they'd already gained control of the great bows on the battlements, preventing the responding Biansha soldiers from getting near. The sharp-eyed Hu Helu immediately spotted the ropes and the unfamiliar soldiers still clambering over the walls one after another. They're not the Libe armored cavalry. Ba Yim climbed atop his horse and chased after Hu Helu. That's not the Libe armored cavalry. But Hu Helu didn't care who the enemy was. He had fought Guo Wei Li, leading one of Libe armored cavalry's most elite forces, at the border of Tudalung Banner, then swept southeast and taken 3rd Sand Camp. He was a mighty general blessed by the gods of Gadal. In his own mind, he was well on his way to becoming an invincible legend of the battlefield. Even if he came face to face with Zhao Hui's main forces, he would face them without flinching. The heavy, overhanging gate of the camp opened with a loud rumble. Hu Helu led his elite troops out on their horses. Yet what he met wasn't the gentle night breeze, but a bright flare of a flaming arrow. The bridleway outside the camp had been strewn with hay. The fire burned but did not blaze. Billows of thick smoke poured into the night and blocked Hu Helu's way forward. He choked, unable to direct his horse. The thick smoke threw the Biansha horsemen into disarray. They had no way to see the path ahead in the darkness. Worried they were riding into an ambush, Hu Helu reined his horse around and led his cavalry away from the bridleway, charging into the grassy fields. Within a few strides, the hooves of their horses sank beneath them. The ponies of the Gosha tribe were fast. The cavalry in the lead stumbled, and those behind, unable to rein in their horses in time, crashed into the leading line. Between one blink and another, they all went down. Hu Helu rolled into the grass and saw the freshly dug pits in the ground along with scattered caltrops. The caltrops were all too familiar. They were the same spikes set up around the outskirts of 3rd Sand Camp. He had never expected the enemy to move them right under his feet without making a sound. Retreat! Ba Yim was right behind them. It's an ambush! Hu Helu staggered to his feet and heard a low bellow. Tantai Hu, who had been lying in the grass in wait, charged forward, blade drawn. More than 1,000 men from the imperial army followed him, rising from the billowing grass to engage the Bianxia horsemen who had fallen from their horses. Tang Jiu had been itching for a fight with the Bianxia horsemen half his life. He didn't recognize Hu Helu, but he recognized these horses. The tragic massacre of the cities after the defeat of Zhongbo's troops was vivid in his mind as blade crashed against blade. Tang Jiu, true to his name, attacked like a ferocious tiger leaping down from its mountain with a roar. He advanced on Hu Helu, his powerful strikes forcing the man back again and again in a retreat. The Bianxia horsemen were too used to fighting the Libe armored cavalry, and the imperial army's advantages over them quickly became apparent. The imperial army operated nothing like the enemy they knew, wielding their blades with an extraordinary deviousness amid the dark stands of grass. After losing their horses and now faced with shorter blades than they were used to, Hu Helu's elite troops struggled to meet the attacks as they usually would. The terrifying weight of Libe's men and horses was gone. On the ground, the imperial army's blades moved just as swiftly as the Bianxia horsemen's scimitars. Even so, Hu Helu soon realized his attackers were few in number. They couldn't even fully encircle his men. Although Tang Jiu was fearsome in his strikes, he was fueled entirely by righteous ardor. Within these vast plains, they had no more reinforcements to call upon. This so-called ambush was merely a handful of men and some pits they had dug in the ground. Rage surged over Hu Helu. He slashed a man down and pressed forward toward Tang Jiu, bellowing, "So, it's just a few rats." Tang Jiu had already been wounded. He kicked Hu Helu away, dashed the blood and sweat from his eyes, and charged forward recklessly once again. The longer Tang Jiu fought, the more convinced Hu Helu grew that they had no more men. Otherwise, reinforcements would have appeared by now. Both sides fought viciously for the better part of an hour before Tang Jiu and his men fell back in disarray. Without horses, they could only beat a hasty retreat on foot across the grass. Yet Hu Helu's bloodlust was at an unprecedented high. How could he stand to let Tang Jiu go? He regrouped the horsemen who still had mounts and, brandishing his scimitar, led them in hot pursuit, his curses muffled by the night wind. The imperial army's provocation had infuriated him. He was determined to run them down and sacrifice them to his blade. Pressing a hand to his injured arm, Tang Jiu dashed wildly through the grass without looking back. He was panting heavily and nearly tripped several times. Hu Helu was right on his heels. As fast as Tang Jiu ran, he couldn't outrun the horses. It took no time at all for the Bianxia horsemen to catch up. A sweat-drenched Tang Jiu covered his buttocks, nearly slashed in half by a Bianxia scimitar, and shouted into the open fields before him, "Fuck your mothers!" That's Tang Jiu. Oh gosh, my little hoo-hoo. That was funny. Battle drums sounded on the horizon, the beat so thunderous it made the rider's ears ache. Realizing something was amiss, Hu Helu reined in his horse and scanned his surroundings. In the next moment, dense clusters of men rose from the tall grass, wearing grass crowns that concealed them amid the growth in the darkness such that Hu Helu could get no clear count of them. His horse restlessly stamped in place. He stared, frozen, as torches flared to life one after the other. A bright line stretching out like a dragon from the spot toward which Tang Jiu was fleeing and extending past the horizon. The concentrated din of the drums sent the alarm bells in Hu Helu's mind jangling. He saw at once that he had played into the enemy's hands. The main forces of Libe were here, and their numbers far surpassed those of his own men. "Retreat!" Hu Helu commanded sharply as he yanked his horse around. "Retreat!" As his horse broke into a gallop, he heard the sound of frantic hoofbeats flanking him. Snowcrest had charged to the head of the group. To Hu Helu's surprise, the horse quickly overtook his swift pony. Glancing over, a sudden and visceral terror struck his heart. He almost thought Xiao Fangxue himself was at his shoulder, but Xiao Chuye was even taller than his father. As the two sped through the night, Hu Helu got a clear look at the pair of eyes completely unlike Xiao Fengshu's, brimming with a greed so insatiable it shook him to his core. Hu Helu felt the hair on his neck rise. He understood from that gaze that there would be no escape for him. Sharp fangs were pressing in, inches away. Attempting to break free of the terrifying pressure, he lashed viciously at his horse with his riding crop. He remembered now. In the eastern mountain range 9 years ago, this wolf pup had bitten off a chunk of his flesh. He'd had exponentially more men than Li Bei, yet he had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of a half-grown youth covered in sewer filth. The horse galloped, wild with pain, breaking up the loose formation of the Biansha cavalry. Hu Helu could see the gate of 3rd Sand Camp ahead. He opened his mouth to call out to Bai Yin for help, but his lips had barely parted before the sky spun and his head rolled off into the grass. Xiao Zhiye charged his way through the Biansha horseman's formation. With every slash, drops of blood flew from Wolf's Fang, the spatters of warm blood staining his cheeks. He pulled back on the reins and wiped blood off his thumb, careful not to stain his ring. Hu Helu's horse was still running when the headless body on its back slid off and tumbled to the dirt before the camp, slowly watering the grass with its master's blood. Chapter 134. Mengzheng. Hu Helu was known among the Tang Jiu tribe as the person most likely to become an Esuhuri, a true hero. Although he was a cruel and brutal man, he was skilled in combat, and his company comprised the very best from the various Biansha tribes. These cavalry men had only fear and no reverence for Hu Helu, yet it was precisely because of this fear that the shock of his death hit them like a boulder to the chest. In the blink of an eye, Hu Helu had been cut down, and crashing down with him came the morale of the Biansha horsemen. In his hasty conclusion that there were countless Li Bei reinforcements on their way, Hu Helu had snuffed out the determination of his men, now without a commanding general, to fight on. With Xiao Zhiye as the epicenter, they scattered in all directions. The long ribbon of torches snaked toward them from behind, as if a procession of 1,000,000 valiant soldiers approached through the grasses. Within 3rd Sand Camp, Gu Jin had also launched a surprise attack. Bai Yin was trapped between the forces inside and out. Upon seeing Xiao Zhiye's composure, he too assumed the main forces of Li Bei had followed him. A final glance into the distance made him sure. He could see obscure shadows behind those torches that seemed to stretch along the tall grass all the way to the far edge of the earth. Bai Yin didn't mean to repeat Hu Helu's mistakes. Pulling on the reins to urge his horse back, he gave the command to abandon the camp. The Biansha horsemen retreated with such haste that they didn't even collect Hu Helu's corpse before scattering into the night. Xiao Zhiye stopped where he was. Tantaihu gave chase with his men and put on a good show, shouting and baying for blood as he pursued them for a mile in the dark. When he was certain Bai Yin didn't dare turn around, he silently called back his men and returned to 3rd Sand Camp. When Bai Yin finally looked again, he could still see those flickering torches extending into the distance. In fact, had he been willing to look a little more closely, or perhaps if he had been able to tamp down his panic, he would have realized that tonight's raid was odd in more ways than one. Hu Helu's abilities were a cut above in every way, but as he himself knew, he was a general to be reckoned with when it came to battles in rough terrain. Sending him to guard a camp and wait on the defensive was a misuse of his talents. If he had heeded Bai Yin's advice and remained in 3rd Sand Camp instead of racing out, he could have swiftly dealt with the small infiltration force Gu Jin had led into the camp and gained the upper hand. With its gates shut, 3rd Sand Camp was an impenetrable fortress. Xiao Zhiye had no siege engines with which to attack its walls. There was no way his army could force its way in. However, following his recent string of victories, Hu Helu had become complacent. He was weak to trickery and deception. When he saw Gu Jin scaling the walls, he had assumed it was a raid from border camp, and when he saw the innumerable torches, he thought it was the Libe armored cavalry's reinforcements. By the time he saw Xiao Chuye, he had been thrown into total disarray. He was defeated before the battle had even begun. Xiao Chuye lifted Hu Hulu's head. He scrutinized the stubble-roughened face for a moment, but couldn't place it. He handed the head to Tantai Hu, who refused to take it, so he passed it to Gu Jin instead. Clean up the bodies in the camp. Bury our brothers from Libe nearby, and bury the soldiers from Biansha farther away. The corpses can't be kept long in this heat. We don't want an epidemic. Gu Jin took the head and was stunned to see it was Hu Hulu. He had never expected Xiao Chuye to hack this general down on their very first encounter. Guo Weili had fought this man for half his lifetime, yet in the end, Xiao Chuye had bested him in a night. "What is it?" Xiao Chuye asked as he unbuckled Wolf's Fang. "You know him?" "His name is Hu Hulu," Gu Jin replied. "Master, he's the one who put Guo Weili on the back foot in the north and occupied Tudulung Banner." Xiao Chuye had been on the move for 2 nights in a row and had other matters to attend to, so he merely nodded before sending Gu Jin away to bury the dead. He called for Tantai Hu to join him and tossed Wolf's Fang to him as they headed inside together. "This camp sure is big." Tantai Hu surveyed their surroundings and marveled. "These walls might rival those of an actual city. There are great bows on the battlements and pitfalls at the foot. From here, you'd be able to fight off any attackers at close quarters or from afar." "My brother spent a lot of money on this place." Xiao Chuye looked up at the walls. "Memorize the layout of these battlements. If there's anything you don't understand, ask Chunyang or Gu Jin. I'll have the military craftsman get you a map of the camp tomorrow. You'll have to know that by heart too." Tantai Hu hastily accepted his orders. Anyone with eyes could see Xiao Chuye was planning to entrust Tantai Hu with some heavy responsibilities. Ever since they left Chidu, Xiao Chuye had brought Tantai Hu along for every battle. Despite being barely literate, Tantai Hu had been trying hard to learn how to read from Chunyang so he wouldn't let Xiao Chuye down. This was his sincere effort to be worthy of his commander's recognition of his abilities. Xiao Chuye wanted to first see the craftsman. He had laid the stakes out plainly for Wu Ziyu, but there was one thing he had chosen not to mention. He had no plans to return Third Sand Camp after reclaiming it. This place possessed the best of both offense and defense, and acted as a protective shield for Border Camp. It could provide Xiaofangshu with reinforcements to the north and access the Northeast Provisions Trail to the west. It was simply too convenient a location. Whoever wanted it back would have to come and negotiate with him in person. By the time Xiao Chuye managed to lie down, dawn was lightening the sky in the east. He slept in the tent for several hours, during which time Chunyang arrived from border camp, but did not disturb him. It was nearly dusk when Xiao Chuye awoke again. As he stood outside the tent, bent at the basin to wash his face, he heard the sound of Meng returning. Xiao Chuye secured his arm guard and whistled for Meng, who circled in the air briefly before landing on Xiao Chuye's arm. Xiao Chuye took out strips of meat from a leather bag and fed his bird. As Meng ate, he saw the large walnut tied to his leg. "His lordship is well," Chunyang laughed. "He's letting you know he's safe and sound." But Xiao Chuye didn't smile. In fact, he was quite displeased. He removed the walnut and weighed it in his hand for a moment before tossing it to Chunyang. "If he sent Meng back like this, he's conveying his orders. Open it up and read it to me. The old man's up to no good." Chunyang opened the walnut and smoothed out the paper tightly folded inside. Xiao Fangshu's handwriting was bold and wild. He wrote that he had long known Amur would send his men to Third Sand Camp, but made no mention of why advance measures hadn't been taken. He also asked if Meng had secretly beaten up Yu, and commented that Meng was too combative, just like Xiao Chuye. I swear I thought that. I doubted myself. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna say that again. Did I say that? He also asked if Meng had secretly beaten up Yu and commented that Meng was too combative, just like Xiao Chuye. Finally, he told Xiao Chuye not to act recklessly. He was to remain where he was and await orders. Xiao Chuye turned the letter over with a finger, skimmed through the scrawled paragraphs on the front side, then pointed at a few concise sentences on the back. Chun Yang cleared his throat and read out in a steady voice, "No one knows a son better than his father. By the time this letter arrives, it'll be too late. I know you'll definitely go for 3rd Sand Camp. In that case, you can handle the escort and transportation in Wu Ziyu's place, as the general in charge of supplies." It was dead silent all around. Tan Tai Hu had never met Xiao Fangshu. In his mind, even if the Prince of Libei refused to praise his second son, he still ought to send Xiao Chuye to the battlefield. Letting Xiao Chuye rack up honor and glory on the battlefield as soon as possible was the best recognition he could give him. In Li Bei's present situation, appointing Xiao Chuye as a supply officer behind the scenes was akin to clipping the talons his son had brandished in Chudu. Had the Prince of Li Bei gone mad? Or would he really hide Xiao Chuye away for another 9 years to appease the heir's supporters? Xiao Chuye pressed his lips into a tight line and endured the silence for a while. Without a word, he turned aside to watch the sun once again setting in the west. Several days later, a caravan of traveling merchants set out from Suzhou and made their way south along the public road toward Chazhou. Kong Ling played the role of steward, while the embroidered uniformed guard members disguised themselves as the attendants and servants of a wealthy family. Shen Zichuan, using illness as a pretext, remained within the carriage and rarely showed himself. Kong Ling had brought along an official travel permit issued by Zizhou, which saved them a considerable amount of trouble along the way. In these troubled times, those who were able to obtain legitimate official documents could not be underestimated. Moreover, traveling as they did with a large number of guards, common bandits didn't dare rob them recklessly lest they offend someone powerful. The beggars along the road multiplied tenfold after they left Suzhou. Children as young as 8 or 9 were seen panhandling in order to survive. They made all kinds of wild, exaggerated claims, even warning of immortals and monsters, in hopes of cajoling passing merchants into spending a bit of coin for peace of mind and safe passage. The first few days passed without incident, but toward the latter half of their journey, it rained, and the weather abruptly turned cold. Shen Zichuan fell ill soon after. Swindlers and charlatans abounded in every town they passed, and shady shops lined the streets one after another. Even if Kong Ling dared call for a physician, Qiao Tianya wouldn't let them within 3 feet of Shen Zichuan. Fortunately, his illness was not serious. His fever persisted for only 2 days before it slowly receded. Shen Zichuan was now spending more and more time hunched over his desk. It was inevitable that he neglected his martial arts training. After Qi Huilian's passing, he often found his body easily overwhelmed and became prone to falling ill with the changing of seasons. In truth, there had been warning signs even back in Chudu, when he had fallen so abruptly ill during the pox outbreak. The carriage rolled over the mud for days and arrived in Chazhou amid pouring rain. When Luo Mu, the prefect of Chazhou, received Kong Ling's visitation card, he was in his concubine's room. He turned it front to back several times, looking it over as though preparing to perform some magic trick. Still, he remained seated right where he was. His 14th concubine was new to the household. They had just held the wedding banquet a few days ago. As his most recent favorite, she was inevitably spoiled and pampered. The girl could read a few words. She took the letter from Luo Mu's hands and asked, "Who's Kong Ling?" Luo Mu pulled her into his lap. "Kong Ling, a dirt-poor scholar. In his early years, he was a subordinate of Tan Tai Long, the commander of the Duanzhou garrison troops. After the man died, he went to work for Zhou Gui." The concubine giggled as Luo Mu nuzzled her with his beard. As if afraid of being contaminated by poverty, she pinched the visitation card between her fingers with her pinky delicately extended. Then how did he come to know my lord? Luo Mu's tone was laced with self-mockery. We were fellow students under the same teacher. Oh my, then you'll have to be a good host to him. This concubine was always giving Luo Mu's principal wife a headache. She was the younger sister of Cai Yu, one of the bandits in Chazhou on whom Luo Mu relied for backing, and wanted nothing more than for Luo Mu to divorce his principal wife in her favor. Seeing a visit by outsiders as the perfect pretext to play hostess on her own, she flirtatiously swatted Luo Mu with the letter. I'll host a banquet for you, and you can invite my elder brother here too, to put Suzhou in their place. I heard a portion of Li Bei's military grain came from Suzhou this year. These people have money. Instead of acquiescing, Luo Mu protested. Why go to the expense of a banquet? We can dismiss him with a handful of cornmeal buns. Far from having money, he's probably here to borrow some. I won't see him. But the concubine wouldn't budge on her idea and threw a little tantrum, pouting like a spoiled child before Luo Mu. The letter slid to the ground as she whined. Luo Mu's eyes followed the letter as it fluttered down. He put a hand on his concubine's arm. It's not too late to meet with him when we next go to Suzhou. Look, the letter has fallen. Pick it up. Seeing that her gentler attempts at persuasion had failed, she rose to her feet and threw a fit. Her delicate embroidered shoe landed right on the letter. She stumped a few times more and cried, I haven't entertained any guest on my lord's behalf since I married into the family. All of us are formally wedded to you, so why am I always an afterthought? I swear. Before she could finish, she saw Luo Mu's expression turn frosty. Move! Concubine Cai had been doted on since the day she had married Luo Mu. He had never raised his voice or scolded her. His rebuke came as a shock, and she shuddered before shuffling a few stunned steps back. Luo Mu bent to pick up the letter. There was a shoe print on it that couldn't be wiped clean. He stashed the letter away with a glum expression, then took Concubine Cai's hand and forced a smile. You don't need to concern yourself with the affairs in the front hall. I'll have a proper chat with brother-in-law myself. I have to go. I'll come see you later. Without waiting for her to recover from her surprise, he lifted the curtain and strode out. The rain was still coming down outside. A servant opened up an umbrella, and Luo Mu briskly walked under it. Is he still here? Invite him to the front hall. I'll see him now. When Luo Mu arrived, Kong Ling had been waiting for some time. Upon seeing Luo Mu heading up the steps, he rose to meet him. The two men smiled the moment they saw each other. Luo Mu gestured for Kong Ling to take a seat, and they proceeded to exchange pleasantries before getting down to business. It's also His Excellency's direction that I've come to see you. Kong Ling took a sip of tea. In recent years, things in Suzhou have gradually improved. The fields are recovering, and there is an abundance of grain. However, the population in Suzhou has been in steep decline. We can't consume as much as we produce. If we store the remaining grain for a year, it's likely to grow mold or end up gnawed on by mice. Luo Mu listened attentively as Kong Ling spoke, noting his healthy complexion and his very few strands of white hair. Kong Ling met Luo Mu's gaze and gave him another smile. So we were thinking, the prefecture of Chazhou has been buying grain from Hezhou and Juexi at high prices for years. You must know you're getting badly ripped off. Why not work something out with our two prefectures? We're close to each other, so transport will also be convenient. We're willing to offer you a price lower than what you can get from Juexi. What do you think? With a start, Luo Mu realized there were wrinkles around Kong Ling's eyes now when he smiled. Looking as though he'd awakened from a dream, he averted his gaze and thought for a moment before saying, I see your point. It's a good idea, but it can't be done. Clearly Kong Ling still had more to say, but Luo Mu raised a hand to stop him. Chazhou is not Suzhou. It's courageous indeed of Zhou Gui to get up and put his plans to action. But how much of his courage was built upon the support of his father-in-law? Suzhou is only in the position it is today because Lord Liu resolved years ago to eradicate the bandits in Suzhou. That isn't the case here. Kong Ling had expected this. He fell silent for a spell, then said, Mengzheng, is there no chance at all? On hearing Kong Ling speak his courtesy name, Luomu hastily turned his face aside. Kongling recognized that Luomu was in a difficult spot. He continued. Suzhou has rebuilt its garrison troops. If this deal goes through, we're willing to lend our assistance to the vital task of eradicating the bandits in Chazhou. Mengzheng, the world is in turmoil, and heroes and villains of all sorts will no doubt rise from among the people. As long as you live among them, you can't stay clear of the conflict. You and I have been friends since we were students together and share the bond of learning under the same teacher. Why not use this opportunity to free yourself from the influence of the bandits? You and Zhou Gui are in Suzhou. How can you understand what I'm dealing with here? Luomu turned back to Kongling. If the bandits in Chazhou are so easy to dispose of, why didn't you come to me all those years ago instead of going to work for Zhou Gui? Before Kongling could explain, Luomu had risen to his feet. At the moment, our grain is all purchased at high prices from Zheshi and Hezhou. Various bandit chiefs have a hand in this business, and everyone takes a cut of the profit. You want me to buy grain from Suzhou instead? But that means cutting off the bandit source of income. This is an impossible deal. If word of it gets out, you and I will both be in danger. You should go back. After summoning an attendant to see the guest out, Luomu took a few steps out the door, then turned back to glance at Kongling. They hadn't seen each other for many years. Strangely enough, no matter how old Kongling looked now, the way he had looked as a student remained firmly etched in Luomu's mind. Wind blew the rain under the eaves and dampened Luomu's shoulders, yet he stood unmoving as the moments stretched. Kongling had missed plenty in his life, and he could feel this moment slipping away, too. Unable to see Luomu's face clearly with the sunlight behind him, he merely said, I'm determined to succeed. If we can't reach an agreement today, I'll return tomorrow. Mengzheng, I'm confident we can make this work as long as you're willing to discuss it with me. Luomu was dumbstruck. Who else did you bring with you that you're bold enough to say this? You showed official paperwork from Suzhou when you entered the city, and you delivered your visitation card to meet me. You've already exposed yourself. I'd advise you not to act rashly. Lie low for a few days, then go back to Suzhou like I told you. Without waiting for Kongling to reply, he lifted his robe and went down the steps. Later, as Shen Zichuan took his medicine and listened to Qiao Tianya's report of the two men's conversation, he couldn't help but turn and give Qiao Tianya a speaking look. Qiao Tianya nodded in understanding. They were fellow students for many years. Naturally, they share a close friendship. In Master's view, how should we negotiate this deal? Luomu is an interesting character. Although Chazhou is a mess, his position as prefect remains unshakable. We'll negotiate however we must. Shen Zichuan's nose was still congested, and his speech sounded slightly muffled. Since he's still standing, it means he has set his mind to remain so. Of what he said today, half were empty words. We must find out which of them are sincere. Alrighty, everyone. That concludes the bonus reading for this week. Chapters 132 through 134. Da-da-da! Hope y'all enjoyed. So anyway, let's go ahead and discuss a little bit of the chapters. So of course, starting with chapter 132, Troops on the Move. Y'all, this was leading up to some very good stuff. I'm really just excited about chapter 133. But anyway, in this chapter, so we have Amour is the epitome of know thy enemy, know thyself. We've already said this before in the previous reading. The man is smart. He knows what he's doing, okay? And in this moment, he let the enemies retreat because he definitely expected them to shelter somewhere else, to move somewhere else. And he was most likely going to ambush them there. Okay. And so Xiao Qia is advising on this, saying like, yeah, y'all could do that. He probably knows you're going to do that, which means he would be lying and waiting for you. What we need to do is act now. Go ahead and protect the border camp because this is the supply site, right? And if that falls, everything else falls. And we can't afford to lose the border camp, basically. So he's like, let's go ahead and attack Third Sand Camp. And so, of course, we have him also mentioning that knowing how Amour is, clearly the man is striking now first or so persistently, because they can't withstand the long winter. They can't endure such a long battle. So he's become impatient. But the other thing is he's also just become confident because he knows his enemy so well. However, the Imperial Army is the one variable that he has not expected. And why would he? Of course. So, element of surprise. He was like, they surprised us, or y'all, now let's surprise them. So the Imperial Army doesn't need, because, Wu Ziyu offered the battle steeds and everything. He was like, no, it's too heavy and it's too noisy. And I was like, yes, this is exactly what the Li Bei armored cavalry needs. They need not only heavy and noisy to strike the fear of God into whoever they are at war against, they also need light and quiet troops, those very, very good at stealth, those who can take you by surprise. Like, you just need that, right? So I'm like, Sa'an, you are doing it up, baby boy. So then when we get to chapter 133, we have Hu Helu, who was already just so arrogant, right? Complacent in all these victories. This is the same thing that Xiao Fengshu talked about. Not to say that the Li Bei armored cavalry was arrogant, but they definitely were complacent. And so he's not liking the military craftsmen. They're upset, obviously, at being captured and saying fuck his mother or whatever. And so he decides, to listen to Bai Yim at first, but then after that doesn't bode over well. After the first try, my guy, it's just the first try. He decides, okay, he's going to skin the commander of the military craftsmen and have the rest of them beat. Okay. All right. Fine. So anyway, I have a note on page 241 where it says, the Liaoying tribe's failed sneak attack on the border camps the day before had sent Hu Helu into a rage. As punishment, the attack squadron from the Liaoying tribe was deprived of food and punished with night watch duty so they couldn't sleep. I'm sorry, my guy. That's not how we do this. I don't know much about the military or anything like that, but one thing that I feel that is just pretty much common sense. If y'all are in the middle of a war, you don't punish your fighters by starving them. They need sustenance to continue fighting. Punish them some other way. Punish them after the battle is won or lost. Don't punish them during. What are we doing? And then boom, goes the dynamite. I mean, there wasn't enough time whether they ate or not, or slept or not, but just like, sir, what the heck are you doing? This is not how you rule, okay? So anyway, I don't need to say too much about the defeat of Hu Helu. Although I'm most excited about this chapter, I don't have as much to say about it. All I can say is that Xiao Zi'an was bad ass. Exactly with that accent, whatever it is. And all I have to say as well is, Daddy Xiao, what did you say? You needed someone who was ravenous? You needed someone who was hungry, or some soldiers who were hungry? You needed a voracious wolf? Look no further, darling. Look no further. I love that Xiao Zi'an got to destroy, completely annihilate the man that he defeated 9 years ago. And he don't even remember. I think that's the part that's really funny. Because Hu Helu definitely remembered, and his life flashed before his eyes before he died. And instead, it being Xiao Chuye, he was just like, what? You know this guy? It was really funny. So then, of course, when we move to the final chapter, I have a note on page 251, and it says, Guo Weili had fought this man for half his lifetime, yet in the end, Xiao Chuye had bested him in a night. I know that is gonna, look, my note says medal, baby, not medal as in MEDAL, but what's been being said in the book is he needs to show his mettle, METTLE, but of course, we're not going to say metal, because that's, yeah. Okay, so anyway, I was like, he's showing his mettle. All right, yes. Then the other thing that I have to say is actually about Tan Tai Hu. My sweet little Tantaihu, you and I have come a long way, darling. I don't think I wanted you to go to the well. Maybe I did. I don't think so. I just really did not like his character. In fact, when I look at my least favorite characters, at one point, no, not least favorite, my most disliked characters, at early on, he was on that list. He is no longer there, obviously, but we've come a long way. And I'm so happy to just see the progression of him and, the relationship, the bond, the brotherhood between him and Xiao Chuye. Because I've already said some time ago, I don't even remember when, if it was I think it was still in this volume, where I said that Xiao Chuye definitely doesn't want to follow in his father's or his brother's footsteps and just have one centralized command. He wants to be more like Tang Jiu Qing, offering power to multiple people and ruling over that. But so people aren't so dependent on just one person. And I said, because of things that he said to Tantaihu and I think Chun Yang, that they may be the ones, but I think it was really just Tantaihu, I don't remember. And lo and behold, it says on page 252 that anyone with eyes could see that Xiao Chuye was planning to entrust him with some heavy responsibilities. It's probably leading some folk. And I just love the fact that he sees that Xiao Chuye trusts him. And he's like, okay, I'm going to learn how to read. So I love everything about that. Really, really do. And then moving forward, we have Xiao Chuye. He claims, because, he's not returning the third, he's not returning to the border camp, okay? He is staying at Third Sand Camp and he has no intention of letting it go. He's like, this is the perfect spot, very convenient. And he's like, anyone who wants to take it is going to have to come to me directly, period. The other thing that I wanted to say, and this is like one of the last things. I'm so mad I didn't say it before because I was like, no, I must be tripping. And I left it alone. But in the chapter entitled Meng and Yu, here's my note. I'm going to read it to y'all. It says, LOL, did Meng scratch up Yu? But then as I kept reading, I was like, maybe not. Okay, no, I don't think so. But then on page 253, we have the letter inside of a walnut from Xiao Fangxu to Xiao Chuye. And it says, like, he asked if Meng had secretly beaten up Yu and commented that Meng was too combative, just like Xiao Chuye. And I was like, wait, so my theory may have actually been correct because it was entitled Meng and Yu. So I just immediately assumed that Yu had gotten a little beat up by Meng. But after hearing about the Falcons, that's what deterred me from my initial thought. So that is what it is. But I just thought it was super hilarious that there's the potential that is exactly what happened. And so then, of course, moving to my last thoughts, it's really just, of course, Daddy Xiao is telling him to stay put. We'll just see about that. But he's telling him to stay put. And then we move forward to Lanzhou, Kongling, and all of them. And Lanzhou, it got cold and he got a fever. No, my guy, look, every time it gets cold, you cannot get sick. We are not having a Cui Buqiu moment, okay? We just cannot. And no, that's not a spoiler. That's like the main thing of Peerless with this man. But I'm just like, Lanzhou, feel better, baby. Feel better, baby, boo-boo. So then, I'm sorry if I hear that noise. But anyway, we move forward. And the last thing I have to say is this Luomu's concubine is the sister to a bandit that he relies heavily on in Chazhou. They're in Chazhou trying to convince this guy to do the deal. And he's not going for it. And I'm just like, wow, this is quite the predicament. You married the bandit's sister. Okay. I don't think that was a good idea, but alrighty. So anyway, we will see where things go after these chapters. I'm very excited about it. Hope you all enjoyed the extra little goodies for this week. And I will see you all again on Monday on Patreon and on Wednesday on YouTube. Well, Nieman. Oh, no. Wait. There was one more thing I wanted to say. Kong Ling and this Luo Mu. Anybody else get those vibes? Or was it just me? Y'all know the vibes. Okay, that's officially it. Well, Nieman.